All right, let's run through the Palindrome React challenge. So I'm here on the page, the Ask a Student Palindrome. I'm going to fork that over to Tom Preet's personal GitHub. It's forking it over. And there we go. So I'm going to clone it down and then we'll walk through. So I've got a directory called Palindrome. Let's cd up one. Let's rm rf palindrome and clear. Let's just create the React app palindrome directly in here. So I'm going to do npx create React app, and I'm going to call it palindrome. Call it palindrome underscore React. Maybe it works, maybe it doesn't. Let's see if that works. All right, it's loading everything up. It's going to take a minute. I'm going to pause the recording until it's done. All right, everything was successfully installed. It says happy hacking. Let's go ahead and cd into palindrome React and open that up into a new VS Code window. All right, so there's my palindrome React. I've got my source, my app.js. Let's go ahead and run this npm start to start this up. And let's see, there it goes. It's loading and automatically opening the localhost. It's loading, starting the development server. It could take a little while to compile, but there we go, compiled successfully. So let's go through here. In this exercise, you will create a component that allows users to input a word and acknowledge to them whether or not the word is a palindrome, spelled the same forwards and backwards. Create a UI that has a text input with an on-change event handler attached to it. Once a user types something into the box, capture what they typed, referencing the dot value of the text input field. So yeah, we'll do that. And it could be done either through the event object automatically that's passed into the event handler. And then we also have to go back to like week one and write our own palindrome function to pass this value into, check whether it's a palindrome, and then display on the screen something, whether or not it's a palindrome or not. So, all right, so I'm gonna close that. And inside of here, let's go ahead and have something that says like H1, is this a palindrome? Let's just see if this shows up on the screen. Come over here, this is a palindrome. Cool. So now we can do, let's see how we want to do this. We can either have it dynamically change as we type into it, or we can type into the form, click submit, and then check whether or not. We might just show it both ways for right now. So I'm going to create an input field. And the type of this input field is going to be a text. And I'm going to give it a name called palindrome. And let's just see if this works. So right here, I've got some text. And I just want to be able to capture what's in there and just have it console log here in the console. So this is a functional based component. And going forward, I don't like having it say function app. I'm going to go with const. I'm going to do an arrow function component, or not arrow function. It's a functional based component. It's just using an arrow function to declare it. Everything should still work. So if I refresh that, everything's still working. All right. So now how do we get this value on here? So there's a couple ways we can do it. I'm going to create a handle change function that's going to take in some event. So I can maybe like when something changes in here, I want it to execute const handle change that takes in some event and console logs inputting. All right. So this input can take on an on-change event handler. And this event handler can, whenever something changes, oh, don't worry, right there. Anytime I type into this input box, I want it to run this function, handle change. Handle change. So right now, if I type into here, every time something changes inside the input box, it's typing inputting right now. But I want to somehow extract the value from that. So I'm going to say, let's console log the event and see if there's something we can extract from the event. So all right, I typed in F and now I'm console logging the event. And now I'm just looking at this, what I have access to on this event, the synthetic based event object. So event.target. So event.target, if I scroll down, I got null. I can grab all event.target base URI. I'm just looking down here, labels, local name is the input. The name of that is called Palindrome. Event.target, I'm just keep scrolling. I can keep going. Let's just go event.target.value maybe. And let's see if I do a hard refresh, I can get, is this, oh, nothing happened. Event.target. Oh, I spelled target wrong. Let's see if that worked. There we go. So event.target.value, I'm able to test whether or not something is a palindrome. So anytime I run that, it gets the value from the input. So now what can we do? All right, so we have the value. Now we have to test whether or not it's a palindrome and maybe make it display something on the screen, whether it's a palindrome. So perhaps when I run this, I need to pass it through some palindrome function. So I can say like const is palindrome, or let's call it is palindrome. That takes in an input, which is going to be this target value, and I want it to return true or false. True or false, depending on whether or not it's a palindrome. So what I'm going to do is bring over this palindrome function. So I can say like, hey, that takes in some input. Let's actually just call this word. Word, I'm going to word dot replace. I'm going to do some regex here. Place all, spaces with, just remove all spaces. I'm going to say, hey, if the word dot length doesn't have a length, I'm going to just return false. Else, I'm going to run a quick way. I can do like reverse, but I'm going to let left equals 0, let right equals word dot length minus 1. I say, hey, while the left index, or the left pointer is less than the right pointer, if the character at the left pointer does not equal the character at the word at the right pointer. I need it to just return false. Else, I need to increment the left pointer by 1 and decrement the right pointer by 1. And if it does that, I can return true afterwards. So I'm just going to come up here and I'm going to console log past that palindrome, past the input into this is palindrome, and it should return true or false in here. So is T a palindrome? Yes. Is, let's say, is race car. So that, look at race car is a palindrome, like right there. That's also true because it gets rid of it. Evil olive, that's a palindrome. So true right there. If I delete that, it's no longer a palindrome. Cool. So there we go. It is a palindrome. But now I need to display something on the screen that says, hey, this is in fact a palindrome. So I'm going to use my local state. So I can say from, import the use state hook from React. And this allows me to create some local data to be stored within this component, and I'm able to render this data on the screen. So I'll just say const is pal, like as in palindrome, and then I'm going to be able to set is palindrome. I'm extracting that from the use state hook, and let's just say the initial value is, should an empty value be a palindrome? I'm just going to say false for right now, just because we want somebody to actually input into the input form or input field in order for it to display something. So this use state hook returns 2 values. It returns an initial variable or initial value, which is false. That's what I'm passing in here, is the initial value of is palindrome. It also returns a function that allows us to update is palindrome, or this is pal variable, to something else, because you can't mutate state directly. I can't just say is pal equals something. I need a function to update state, and that function is right here called set is pal. Now I'm extracting set is pal and is pal from the use state, so it's just returning a variable. I'm sorry, the use state hook is returning a variable, which I'm calling is pal, and it also returns a function that I'm calling set is pal. So the first argument in this array is the variable. The second argument, or the second value, is a function that allows me to update is pal. So now is pal's initial value is false. So down here, I'm just going to render is, I'm just going to say, let's do it a paragraph tag, or I'm just going to make it a div. And it's going to render this is pal. This is pal Boolean value. Oh, let's cancel that. So if I refresh that, so it's false. Why isn't this working? Oh, so now, so let's just say so since this is false, let's just render it to true first. Let's just see if it shows up on the screen. Still does not show. I'm just gonna look over here. Input div is I'm just gonna make this an H1. So true, set is pal. So in here, it doesn't render Boolean values as text, so I might have to do some conditional rendering inside of JavaScript. Now I can't write pure if statements. If, is pal equals true, render something. You can't just render any kind of JavaScript inside of there. I can use a ternary operator to actually render it. So I can say is palindrome. If that's true, render, I can render true. Just else, if it's not, render false. I'm going to go back up here into my use state and set the initial value to false. So right there. It's false initially, but when I type in here and make this a palindrome, I want this to update dynamically, to change automatically. So with that, I can say, hey, where can I do this? I can pass that into here, and it comes into here is palindrome. How about in here, instead of just rendering false, I can say set is palindrome to false. Whoop. Set is palindrome to false, and I can put that everywhere it turns to false. So I can put that there. I can also return it here. I can also return it here, but in this case, I want it to return true. So if I refresh that, now anytime, what's great about React is that it looks to see whenever state changes, it will re-render. So if I type in race car, and now it turns to true. But when I delete it, it turns to false. So it changes, it updates dynamically. Race car, evil olive, great. So that's one way we can do it. Just using it, updating it dynamically in just a single input. So yeah, let's just quickly go over what we did. So we created an input field that's a type text that has a name of palindrome. This name isn't necessarily required right now, but it will be in a second when I decide to use a form. And I have an on-change event handler that I'm tying directly to the input field. Anytime I type something in there, this on-change event handler will execute whatever function I have within inside of these curly braces, which is currently handle change. So anytime I type in change something in here, like type in a word or any character or delete any character, it runs this handle change event handler. And this handle change function takes in the event. So what event is actually happening? And I'm literally just console logging the is palindrome function right now. But right here, I'm taking an event, and let's actually say let input value equals event.target.value. And now let's pass that input value into the palindrome. So I'm taking this event, I'm extracting the value from that input field by doing event.target.value. I'm assigning that to a input value, and I'm passing in that input value into this is palindrome function. And this in palindrome function takes in a word, it removes any white spaces. This is just a simple algorithm, the palindrome function, to test whether or not something is a palindrome or not. So if the word doesn't have a length, it sets the is palindrome or the is pal value to false. So if it doesn't have if there's nothing in the input, it just automatically sets the is pal to false. Else, it'll come into here. Hey, if the left pointer, the character at the left pointer does not equal the character at the right pointer, that means it's not a palindrome. It again sets that value to false. Else, if it goes through and everything works, and then it is a palindrome, it sets the is pal value to true. And down here on line 34, this H1, I'm just doing a ternary that has, inside of my JSX, I'm doing some JavaScript. Hey, if the is pal is true, question mark, yes, it is true. I want it to render true, else render false. All right, so that's is palindrome. Now I'm just going to refactor this. Instead of just using a simple input, I'm going to use a form. So I'm going to create a form like so. I'm going to also create this input field, but I could use an on-change event handler, or I can do something else. So instead of just directly going through here, I can refactor it to use this form. All right. So I've got this form. I've got an input field. And in this case, I'm going to use this palindrome name thing. Also, I'm going to create a div, and I'm going to create a button, submit. So instead of this changing dynamically, when I input, I want it to change when I click the submit button. Type submit. There we go. So when I click that submit button, I want it to do something. So in this case, when I click submit, what should I do? So right now it's still updating dynamically, but when I click submit, I want it to do something. So I've got handle change. All right. So how about instead of this handle change, passing that directly into this is palindrome, I wanted to set it to an input. I wanted to set it to our state. So const input val set input val equals use state, and the initial value is 0. I'm sorry, is an empty string. So you can add multiple state values to a single component. And instead of handle change passing it into the palindrome, I'm going to pass that into, I'm going to set the input value to this input value. So I'm going to say set input value like so. So now when I refresh that and submit it, I want it to update. But let's just make sure that this input value is actually being stored. So in between the return statement, just somewhere randomly inside the function, I'm going to console log the input value. Input value, or input val. So now I refresh it. Notice how input val is empty, but when I update it, this is my input value. Notice how my input value is changing, my state's input value. Is this a palindrome? So notice how it's changing right now. Great. So it set this input value, but now when I click submit, I want it to do something. So I'm going to have another function called const handle submit that takes in an event. And there's a couple ways I can do this. But for this one, when I click submit, I'm going to pass in this input value into this is palindrome. So I can just say is palindrome input value or input val. And now this handle submit, when I click this form, I can have an on submit event handler attached to this form that calls this handle submit function. So on handle submit, it comes up here, runs through this event. I'll talk about that in a second. Runs through this is palindrome, passes this input value that's attached to state. Now it's attached to the component state. Runs through here, this is palindrome, then it updates the is pal state value. So let's refresh that. So I'm going to say race car. So it's currently false. When I click submit, I want it to turn true. Oh, see how it turned true and then went back to false real quick? Is because this form automatically refreshes the page. It refreshes the component. And we want the default behavioral of this form to, we don't want the default behavioral to work. So we can say, hey, prevent. So we can say, hey, on the event of this form submitting, we want to prevent the default behavioral of that form. So if I refresh that and click erase car and click submit, now it turns to true. Maybe I want it, is this a palindrome, which it shouldn't be. And if I click submit, now it turns to false. And notice how here I'm still console logging. Let's go ahead and delete that. Great. Now so we can evil olive and click submit. Now that's true. Evil olives, that's false. There we go. So that's one way, that's another way I can do it. I can even get rid of this on change event handler. Just totally get rid of it. Get rid of this as well. And now I can extract this value from the input from the form directly in the handle submit. So I can do that by saying let input value, I'll just say input. I can do event.target dot the name, I think it's the palindrome. Palindrome dot value, event.target. I'm just going to console log this right now, console log input. And pass that input directly in there. Input. There we go, app.12, JS12. Right there, I'm able to get that input. So in this case, I'm not even using this use state portion of it, which is fine. I could use it, I could not use it. It just depends on what I want to do. But I can say input, is that, nope, is race car. True is Tom, a palindrome. False is evil olive. True. Great. So those are three different kind of ways we can create the is palindrome or the palindrome challenge. All right. So with that, I will stop the recording.